To welcome in the new financial year today, the car industry's grubby little lobby group in Canberra has just taken a dirty big swipe at the weapons-grade intellects underpinning the government's new stealth tax on car buyers, which goes by another name, the New Vehicle Efficiency Standard, or so-called NVES. The reductio ad absurdum of the industry's message is actually pretty simple. The car industry, it says, has busted its nuts delivering EVs onto showroom floors nationwide. Unfortunately, however, the government has dropped the ball on critical infrastructure and integration and minor pesky detail, I suppose. Ordinary car buyers simply are not queuing up to buy EVs. Well done, all concerned. Assembling a system tailor-made to deliver cars that, statistically, nobody wants. I'm John Cadogan, autoexpert.com.au. New cars cheap, but Australia only. Website. Code. Senior executive governmental morons have placed the car industry's gonads in a vice again. From this morning, July the 1st, when the government's so-called New Vehicle Efficiency Standard officially kicked in. Essentially, car makers have to keep lowering the average CO2 levels emanating from the exhausts of the vehicles they sell, or pay the price, tax. Because that's what it is, dude. It's a tax on your next Hilux or Ranger, basically. Every year, the lead screw on the vice gets a nice firm crank, just like in hell, exerting extra pressure on the industry's gonads. Fines are going to be handed down to those companies that breach the emissions caps, which get tighter every year, because Chris Bowen and Brown Noser 6 love one thing, don't they? Your money. Car makers handed those fines are going to pay them, obviously, but the way arsehole car makers think, to them this is just merely another cost of doing business. Just like, for example, import duty. They're just going to pass these costs on to you. So, the barbed wire enema of the government's new efficiency standard, the NVES, will ultimately find its way deep into your rectum if you are a new car buyer. From tomorrow, vehicle manufacturers will be held accountable for the emissions profile of the vehicles they supply to the market, with credits awarded for low-emission vehicles and debits applied where carbon dioxide targets are exceeded. Such a grubby operation, the FCAI, the grandiose-sounding Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries, industriously pretending to be right there with you on the side of the consumer, but with a proud history of being anything but, I would argue. Worryingly, and this might be cognitive decline at my age, I suppose, I find myself agreeing with those grubs in Canberra in this instance. FCAI senior cheese Tony Webber said the automotive industry had worked hard to meet the requirements of the scheme, making significant investments in product supply compliance systems and market readiness. Being only human, I do find myself loving TDub, platonically. Of all the lobbyists in all the land, TDub is my hands-down favourite. You should go to one of the concerts where he covers the Bee Gees' Stayin' Alive. How he hits those high notes, dude, I will never know. It is truly amazing. There are now more than 100 electric vehicle models and more than 50 plug-in hybrids available to Australian consumers. But supply is only part of the equation. Demand remains constrained by a lack of affordability, infrastructure and consumer confidence, factors that the government must address if the NVES is to succeed. Mr. Dub there, pontificating proudly on behalf of his grubby industry, he just said, I'm paraphrasing, that EVs are simply too fucking expensive, dude. Charging them is also a pain in the ass if you don't have off-street parking especially, or if you travel long distances regularly. Hardly anyone can work on them. There's that. And people aren't that confident in EVs generally because they watch the news from time to time and they see them often enough on fire, on ships, in apartment blocks, etc. under your house. So confronting. And bottom line, no car maker can meet the government's outrageous NVES targets if people just don't want to buy EVs. Despite the broad range of low and zero emission vehicles on offer, EVs account for just 7% of new vehicle sales, well below earlier predictions. 7%, okay? That's with a massive government incentive for ordinary workers on salaries in place. And it's been there for several years now. Imagine how hard those sales are going to crash if that incentive ever goes away. 7%. That's the best they can do, artificially enhanced in this way. But let's do a thought experiment, shall we? Let's get Harry Potter's frickin' wand and wave it around enthusiastically, magically doubling EV sales right now to, say, 15%, right? That would be about 180,000 EV sales annually, which is pretty much uncharted territory right there. Fantasyland, I would argue. But if this really is Harry Potter's wand, let's crank it even harder and make it magically 250,000 EVs annually. You can do this in thought experiments, but you can't do it in reality because we'd never get the supply. There's that. Now, there are 17 million light vehicles on Australian roads. At that rate of 250,000 new ones a year, it would only take about 17 times 4 is, let's call it 70 years to make every light vehicle on the road an EV. This is why net zero is such a pipe dream. It's emblematic of the reason why net zero is a pipe dream. In Australia, people want big, fat diesel utes and big SUVs. This is what we buy. Money talks. And hey, it's a free country, or it was last time I looked. You can buy a Tesla if you want. I promise not to care at all. All these car makers going all in on electrification have backed the wrong king horse. At least they have in Australia. And so has the government, which should be working for us, but clearly is not. What we need to do is make all new vehicles as efficient as feasibly possible in the circumstances without embracing nonsense, fictional concepts such as net zero. This is well below the level needed to meet the NVES objective, which is driven by aggressive targets that become vastly more stringent every year until 2029. I suspect that what's really going to happen here is that at some point in the future, between now and 2030, someone's going to have to admit that the policy is unattainable bullshit and just gut it, and then hopefully fall on their sword. The lack of public recharging and total cost of EV ownership remain major hurdles, especially as electricity prices skyrocket around the country. TDub there again. Almost everything that's been touted about EVs is flat out a lie. They are not simpler, for example. They're just differently complex. Nobody can work on them. Nobody is qualified to work on or repair battery packs. Used EVs are worthless because you cannot health check the batteries in practice. And if that battery craps out on you, you've got a steaming pile of scrap on your hands. It's worth nothing. And recycling those batteries, it's possible, but nobody actually does it because the government prefers to fondle its scrotum metaphorically and attend press conferences about this and that. Think about the sound bites and being on message, rather than get the responsible systematic integration of this important alternative transport system across the line properly. What is needed now is a serious, coordinated effort to make the transition viable for all Australians, not just early adopters. To date, the government has not put in that effort. Jesus, quote, the government has not put in that effort. Them's brave words for a lobby group cheese to utter publicly, I'd suggest. No cocktails, almost certainly, in the prayer room on Friday evening for TDub. And one knows one is well inside the inner circle when one gets that particular invitation. Those taxpayer-funded Parliament House silk togas are very smooth too, I'm told. It guts me to find myself sitting here nodding and agreeing with TDub. He's even taking the bold initiative of crapping all over his own fine organisation's EV selling sub-membership, isn't he? But not Polestar and Tesla, obviously, because they've already had a somewhat hilarious tantrum earlier, whence they told him to fuck right off over his earlier very ambitious NVES commentary. Although probably not in those words, or maybe it was, I don't know. We're never going to know. Quote, making the transition, please. This government seems hell-bent on behaving as if it's our parents, telling us what we can and what we can't drive or think or do or post, etc. But we're not children, are we? Making some transition from frickin' pencils to biros. That's pretty clear. Personally, I quite like the 2 diesel vehicles I own. I really like them. So I'm not a starter for an EV anytime soon, no matter how socially virtuous that might be in some circles. I'm just not. And neither are most of the people I know. Because EVs are simply too fucking expensive and they're integrated so appallingly into the overall personal transport proposition for most people. They just don't suit most people. Like, obviously they do suit some people, certainly, but there's never going to be any real society-wide transition. The people I know generally who drive EVs didn't buy them. They work for car companies that are all in on EVs. For everyone else, the impediments to ownership are insurmountable. And pretty obvious if you're even halfway scientifically literate. It'll be a miracle if the number of EVs on our roads ever exceeds like 25%, which is why there's such an epic net zero red herring. EVs are the wonder bra of personal transportation. This government's NVES bullshit is just more of their attempted social engineering, kind of like The Voice, or expecting us all to endure bullshit welcomes to country in one's own fucking country, for God's sake. I find that hard to tolerate. Social engineering is a big iceberg, right? And Australia is in danger of becoming the frickin' Titanic. Bullshit misinformation legislation, banning people under 16 from using social media, taxing unrealised gains, and appeasing endless minorities who are often not only openly delusional, seemingly, but who also seek official sanctions against many of us who, A, don't give a crap about their burning issue in the first place, and B, are fundamentally unwilling to embrace what seem like their delusions. Everyone wants equality, it seems, provided they end up more equal than we average punters in mainstream society, disgracefully. The function of a sane government would be to carry out the will of the people, not to be our frickin' de facto parents or endlessly appease the delusional. And the last time I looked, the will of new car buyers was overwhelmingly to buy dual cab utes and SUVs. This is who we are in our allegedly free democratic society, right? If Mensa Man Bowen and his boss Brown Noser 6 want to cut transport emissions from light vehicles, they could simply make public transport A, free, and B, not spectacularly shit. It's hard to understand that when you've got, I don't know, a Commonwealth car and a taxpayer-funded chauffeur 24/7 and a taxpayer-funded fucking jet at your disposal, of course. Like, imagine having to catch a train to work every day like some peasant. Dude. In a parallel universe, Mensa Man and he of the brown nose would even respect the future sufficiently to build us a decent high-speed rail network between major cities on the proud Schutzvillian eastern seaboard. Imagine Australia with a high-speed rail network, equivalent to what they've had for years in South Korea or China. When I was in China in January, we did 650 Ks one day, A to B, on the high-speed train, maxing out at 250, and the trip took just 3 hours with 9 intermediate stops. Imagine that. That's freaking honking, dude. I want one of them for us. I want a whole network. You can't experience that here in our allegedly advanced first world shithole, can you? Mainly because every federal transport minister since the year dot has had their heads so far up the clacker of Qantas that they can see what they're going to have for breakfast tomorrow in the chairman's lounge. That's not like a total frickin' conflict of interest, is it? You can't even catch any train, no matter how spectacularly Dickensian, from Canberra to Sydney, no matter how hard you want to escape from that hellhole and inflict yourself upon this one up here. Mensa Man's NVES thought bubble is weapons-grade bullshit, nothing else. The only effect it will have on net zero is net zero. The government should scrap it henceforth instead of just happily driving the price of new cars up across the board and pocketing the revenue. It's really just a stealth tax on car-buying individuals like us, but it's cloaked so deceitfully and disgracefully in purported environmental virtue.